Okay, we are live. Hub, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, along with our Shaw Local Bears Insider beat reporter, Sean Hammond, and a very special guest. You know him possibly as the most recent inductee to the Wisconsin Broadcast Hall of Fame, certainly as the guy who called that 85 Super Bowl for you and spent 13 years in the booth with me and some of our other partners calling Bears games, left to head up to Green Bay, and Wayne Larrivee, now the voice of the Green Bay Packers, good enough to join us. And Wayne, this is some fun we've been having. I think everybody's involved in podcasts one way or another, but Kyle Neighbors, our group sports editor, discovered this StreamYard link where we could actually broadcast live as we do the podcast. So hopefully for anybody who's watching, if you have questions for Wayne or myself or Sean about the Packers, about the Bears, about the NFL, feel free to put those questions up and we'll try and answer them for you. But with all that as the table setter, most importantly, Wayne, how you doing? How's the family? How's it going up there? You're not all the way up in Green Bay, but you're north of us. So how's it going up there?
It's going fine, Hub. Glad to see the pandemic kind of winding down, and maybe we can get back to some normal coverage of NFL football.
Yeah, it would be kind of unique. The one place I want to start, because obviously we're going to get very Bear Packer specific, but just from your perspective, I am still under contract with Westwood One. I am still a sideline reporter. Hope to be back on the sidelines this year, but there were no sideline reporters allowed during the 20 season due to the pandemic. And I know even calling games, you had a really unusual setup where I believe you were in the booth at Lambeau, but not actually traveling with the team. Can you tell everybody a little bit about how that worked for you guys?
Yeah, we on the road games, Hub, we basically broadcast in front of two monitors in the hallway of the press box at Lambeau Field in that little atrium area as you go toward the radio booth. So it was done off of a monitor. You had an all 22 feed on one side. You had a raw network feed on the other side. And that's what you had to call the game off of. Now we had some piped in sound, that kind of thing from the game site. But beyond that, you had to television. It's amazing to me. I did television for over 20 years with ESPN regional and mostly in the Big Ten. And I never realized how little you see on television until I had to try to call a game off of television for radio. And it's much different. You don't see nearly as much as you need to see. And so, in that regard, it was a challenge.
Sean, I'm going to let you jump in a second, but Wayne just jogged a memory for me. So you didn't realize when we were trying to broadcast that Fog Bowl, New Year's Eve of '88, how little you see on television? For some reason, that's what popped into my head. We did a ton of games together, but that's the one I get asked about the most.
Yeah, I don't know. That was an incredible. We saw nothing on TV or in the stands as well. That was an incredible. I'll never forget that game. It was an incredible. It was New Year's Eve. And I remember late in the second quarter, it was getting a little hazy. And then I saw what looked like smoke pouring over the south rim of the stadium. And, this is before they put the spaceship into Soldier Field. So, that rim was not that high up. But anyway, smoke is pouring over the rim. And I remember we were on the air at halftime and on WGN. And Roger Treemstra was our weather guy. And so they brought him in on a special guest appearance. And I asked him, I said, Roger, is this going to get any better? He said, oh, no, it's going to get worse. And he wasn't kidding. It got worse as that game went along.
Sean, it's funny. I just remembering that now, the first question I always get asked about it is, well, why didn't one of you just go down to the field? And I don't want to date myself or Mr. Larrivee, but we didn't have sideline reporters in those days. We didn't have that kind of equipment. We didn't have wireless mics in the booth because we talked about it. We had a legendary radio guy. Dan Fabian was our boss, our station manager. He basically invented the business as far as I'm concerned. And he was in the booth at halftime. I can't remember if he was in the booth or on the phone with us and said, well, could we get you down there? But we also didn't have cell phones, so there was really no way to communicate other than for us to sit there. And at one point, Wayne, I'll never forget, it was the start of the fourth quarter. Jim Hart, who was our third partner, kicked his shoes off, put his feet up on the wall, and said, guys, I can't see anything, so I'm just going to listen to you. That was kind of how that broadcast went.
It's funny because that was an epic Philadelphia team. Buddy Ryan was the head coach, and had to be his third year at that point in time. They had Reggie White on that team. Some great players, Jerome Brown, and they had Randall Cunningham at quarterback. And they were moving up and down the field against a still very good Bears defense. But every time they got inside the 20, they couldn't quite put it in the end zone. Meanwhile, the Bears, were playing on the lead the whole way through. And so when the fog hit in that second half, you really wondered how long, would this be enough to hold the Bears on top to get to the next game? And the next game would be the NFC Championship game. But I'll never forget, Maurice Douglas made an interception. And I said, and Maurice Douglas on the interception, and he disappears into the clouds.
Man, that would have been the perfect time to introduce the sideline reporter. That's technology wasn't there yet, huh?
Well, what's interesting, Sean, is that sideline reporters did start to come a few years after that. I don't know if that actually had anything to do with it or not. But Wayne, I don't know if you have a copy, but one of the things that we used to do when Wayne and I were broadcasting back in those days, it was at WGN, is every week we would get cassette versions of the broadcast to listen to and study and try and learn from. And we would also get, because of our relationship with the video people with the team, not every week, but most weeks, we would get the TV broadcast with our call, voiced over it so that we could really study. I didn't bother with the TV broadcast that time, but I actually still have a copy of that broadcast. And apparently somewhere at WGN in the transition to new technology, Wayne, they lost a lot of their archives. Wow. And I don't know if you have a copy, but besides you and me, I've gotten calls from Canton for excerpts from that. I get calls from other stations all the time. I'm not sure how many copies of that broadcast really exist. Yeah,
that's interesting. I would also be curious to know if WGN has a copy of the Super Bowl. That was their first year with the team after 8 years at WBBM. But yeah, I mean, those things, it's amazing when you think about it and how long ago that was too. That's the other thing that's scary for us.
So Kyle, Wayne and I, actually Wayne got here in 85. I had been doing some work at WGN Radio for a couple of years, but joined the broadcast group doing pre, post, and half in 85. We had no idea what we were getting into. We were working, Wayne was working in the booth with Dick Butkus and Jim Hart. I was working with Chuck Swirsky. But it kind of took off from there. And for the next really 14, 13 seasons, we were the staples. Other guys came and went, and obviously go back a long way. And so you can imagine the angst and the drama when Wayne had the opportunity to go to Green Bay. I'll never forget that transition as well. And,
we don't have to relive that one.
No, we're not going to. That one took a while for a lot of people to get used to. I think folks have finally accepted it. I hope that you are as welcome in Green Bay as you deserve to be, because I know early on, not only were Bears fans furious, but I guess some Packers fans weren't that excited about getting the Bears broadcast.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're exactly right, Hub. And, this is back in 99. This is before you had social media on the internet. Things like what we're doing now didn't exist back then. So you had sports talk shows, but not like the media you have today. And so, that was I was glad that we didn't have that kind of coverage.
There were a lot of fun stories that came out of that one of these days, watch Wayne's Twitter feed or watch mine, and we'll broadcast a location at some bar where you can join us and we'll tell some of those stories, because I don't think we'd want to tell them anywhere else, to be honest with you.
Well, before we get too far along, I want to let the folks who are watching and listening know that you can comment and ask your questions. If you got questions for Wayne or for Hub, the best way to do that is through YouTube. Just type your comment right in there. We can bring it up on the screen. I'll also be monitoring our Twitter feed if you got comments on there, although I can't get those up on the screen, but I'll keep an eye out for those. So feel free to ask a question as we move along here. And Wayne, do you know yet what your sense is? Are you going to be back in the booth this fall? And what's it going to be like to have some fans back at Lambeau?
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward also to traveling to games too. Because there's no substitute when you're doing a game to being at the game. And so we're looking forward to that. That's the plan right now. The NFL's plan is to play before full houses. So I would imagine that means we're back to normal as a media group as well.
So, Wayne, I'm going to give you pause for a moment. You know, we're going to discuss the topic. It is not the topic of this podcast, but I'm guessing that you're eating, breathing it, sleeping it, and everything else. But what's unique to me is to take a step back and a little bigger picture, the whole Bears-Packers phenomenon, the rivalry. And you go to the end of the season, and I got to believe that Packer Nation is in heaven. You know, back-to-back 13-3 seasons. Granted, came up a game short of a Super Bowl, but you know, Rodgers at this stage of his career, another MVP. It seems like everything is rosy. And then you look at Bears Nation in Chicago, and they I don't want to say everybody, but the majority clearly want the GM fired. They want the coach fired. Everything's horrible. Then we go through basically 98% of free agency in the draft, and suddenly Bears fans are in heaven. Everything's great now. You know, that'll last for another couple months, but for now it's great. And all hell breaks loose in Green Bay. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen.
You know, it's amazing how right now the Bears have a quarterback and the Packers apparently don't. I'm just saying apparently because, you know, if you believe the reports, Aaron Rodgers wants out of Green Bay. If you believe those reports, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, and everybody's excited about Justin Fields, and I guess deservedly so. You know, it's funny, Hub, you and I have been around the NFL draft enough to know that when you see somebody late in the process fall through water like a rock, you know that guy's actually going to be pretty good and get picked up early. And you know the Justin Fields transition. You know the pick looks like a great pick for the Bears. It really does. When you look at what that kid did at Ohio State, how he played, what they can do with him, it'll be interesting to see. Now we thought they got it right with Mitchell Trubisky. Some did anyway. We thought they had it right with Jay Cutler, but maybe this is the first franchise quarterback, the quarterback that the Bears have had since Sid Luckman, if we could say that. But only time will tell. And you know what? It looks good. It looks great on paper, but we don't know till they hit the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Sean, what's really funny about it is Wayne reminds us that the only reason that Justin Fields is a Bear is because he started to fall. Not as bad as Aaron Rodgers did, but the only reason Aaron Rodgers is a Packer is because 22 other teams made a horrible mistake. And so there is even some symmetry there if you think about it.
Yeah, there is. And I thought an interesting little comment there, just listening to you, Wayne, you said, you know, if you believe what we're hearing about the Aaron Rodgers stuff. So, you know, nobody really knows, but what do you think? Do you get any sense of how real this rift is?
Yeah, you know, Sean, obviously the Jordan Love draft pick, Aaron said it himself, surprised him. He didn't expect it, that kind of thing. But he went out and had an MVP season. And, you know, after the season was over, he made that comment of, you know, my career, the rest of my career is a beautiful mystery or something like that. Or, you know, he said at the end of the championship game in a down moment, he said, you know, hey, there are a lot of futures here are unknown, including mine. And so everybody went to one thing after another. Then you didn't hear anything for a while. And Aaron said on the Pat McAfee show a few weeks later that, you know, why wouldn't I be back in Green Bay? And then, you know, we got to February. And deeper into February, I should say, the Super Bowl's over, and now their teams are gearing up for free agency, and the Packers are redoing contracts because, like most teams in the league, they're up against the cap that went down by $12 million or more, and so they're redoing contracts, and you kept waiting for them to redo the Rodgers contract because that's where they could pick up a tremendous amount of cap space, and it never happened. And so, you know, looking from the outside in, I have no insider information, but I imagine during that process, if that's what happened, they tried to renegotiate the contract. If something happened there that got the two sides, you know, off kilter a little bit.
You know, there's two parts of this that make it impossible for me to believe that Aaron Rodgers is innocent in all this. I'm not saying the Packers are blameless, and I have far less inside information than you do, and you just said you don't have a lot. But nobody will ever convince me the way this has gone that these things that have, quote, leaked out have not been with the assistance of Aaron Rodgers. It makes no sense whatsoever that Mark Murphy and Brian Gutekunst would want to embarrass themselves this way. It doesn't help them. It doesn't give them any leverage. So I can't imagine it's coming from the organization. And I don't think various anonymous teammates suddenly just decided on their own to be offering this commentary. Now, I'm biased and colored a little bit by knowing other things about Rodgers, off the field personal life in general. He's had some people issues, I think it's fair to say. But that's the part that I find really troubling. It just feels like Rodgers is making this a lot more about Aaron Rodgers than he is about the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, well, wasn't it Adam Schefter who broke the story on the eve of the draft? And, he said that it was a compilation of different things he had been hearing over the weeks before leading up to the draft. So, he said it wasn't directly from Rodgers and it wasn't from the organization. I know the Packers organization, there's no way they would, as you mentioned, Hub, why would they allow something like this to get to the public? But the one thing Mark Murphy did do draft weekend, he came out and made a statement that said, hey, listen, we're working through some issues here, and but we intend to have Aaron Rodgers as our quarterback going forward and for the foreseeable future. I think where this whole thing, and all of us sit on the outside looking in, is saying, okay, Rodgers had 4 years to go on his contract. They find a quarterback that they like. They think that Jordan Love is a guy they can really develop. They know they're not going to have to play him for a couple of years, maybe even 3 years, but they feel like he's a talent they can develop. Is he the next Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre, or is he going to be that level? Who knows? They don't know, and they didn't know, but they found a quarterback that they really liked. And I knew going into that draft 2 years ago that there were a couple of quarterbacks that had they slid into the second half, maybe the third of the lower third of the draft, that the Packers would be interested. So Jordan Love wasn't a total surprise when they made that pick, at least not to me. I knew they liked a couple of those guys whom they knew would maybe slip into the second half of the first round. And they went after Jordan Love, and they actually traded up to get him. So that kind of put the wheels started turning at that point. It's certainly, from a salary cap standpoint, it did put some definition, I guess, to Aaron Rodgers' tenure. Would it be infinite with the Packers? No, probably not, because they just drafted a quarterback. Eventually, they're going to have to get that first-round quarterback on the field. They're going to want to see what they have before, too long, because, again, you got to play them within about 3 years, so you know what you have. Then you exercise the fifth-year option, and then you go from there. But that's that's what set this whole thing in motion. But Aaron handled it so well last year, guys, that I really didn't think much about it coming out of the season, and then I honestly think, in just my observation, that maybe something happened when there were talks to renegotiate, move money around, extend, money for the salary cap on his contract, that something must have gone on there. And I don't know what, but that may be what happened that changed the scenario from what we saw last season, because Aaron and the team handled that whole situation exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think I read something just going through some Packers stories today. Aaron Jones said something to the effect of, Aaron Rodgers was there for Jordan Love, and he was there, mentoring him throughout that process. I know it was a weird year with media access and getting to see these guys, but did you get that sense at all that they were working well together before all this?
Well, I know Aaron Rodgers well enough to know that he's not going to hold Jordan Love accountable for anything that happened. He knows that Jordan Love didn't make that draft choice, and no, he also Aaron also felt really bad about, let's put it that way, about his experience early on with Brett Favre. Now, they're friends today, don't get me wrong, but it was not an easy situation when Aaron came on in 2005 out of the draft. As my friend Andrew Brandt described, he was in the organization at the time. They made that draft pick. We were doing a draft party down at the Lambeau Field atrium. The boos of the crowd when they announced Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback pick in the first round shook the foundation of that entire draft room, shook their souls, as Andrew Brandt said. But they made that pick, and Ted Thompson came downstairs and he talked to the crowd. And I was one of the few people excited about that pick because I remember when I was working for ESPN Regional, Randy Wright and I did a Cal-Illinois game at Illinois in a very good Lou Tepper Illinois defense. Aaron Rodgers making his first start for Cal. He was alternating with another quarterback at that point, but it was his turn to start for Jeff Tedford, and Rodgers was lights out. So I know Randy was extremely impressed with him, and I followed him from then on. And the next year, against a national championship USC squad, he completed 24 passes in a row against USC at the Coliseum. And then the following year, he came out. So I thought this was great. I remember saying to the crowd, I said, folks, listen, I understand you wanted a defensive lineman, you wanted somebody that could make a difference right away. But there will come a day when you really applaud the pick of Aaron Rodgers. And certainly that day came. It took 3 years, but it came.
Wayne, I mentioned two things that trouble me about Rodgers' side of the story. And then I want to move on and talk about the rest of the division and get your thoughts on the Bears as well. But, the second part is these reports from multiple sources about him calling Brian Gutekunst Jerry Krause and treating him like Michael Jordan, treated Jerry Krause. And there certainly has been nothing from Rodgers to deny that or to correct that. No statement coming. It feels very believable. And I don't think, listen, Aaron Rodgers is not only in the conversation, but maybe the leader in the conversation for second best quarterback of all time. Brady, at some point, we got to stop this and say Brady is Brady. Yeah. And he's probably one of the 5 greatest players ever. There's no argument about that. But for him to put himself in the same category with Michael Jordan, he's not there either. It's the 6 rings versus the 1 ring. And so I don't know Brian Gutekunst. I don't know what kind of guy he is, but he's the general manager of the football team. And if the leader in the locker room and the most important player on the team is generating that kind of relationship, that feels like it's not good for anybody.
I think you're right, Hub. It's not good for anybody. And, the other thing that gets me is that for that to be disclosed, somebody, because, those conversations, as you know, happen in the inner sanctum of the locker room, and they happen away from reporters. And even when you're kind of kidding around and all that, it's kind of a private thing. You know what I mean? That's not the kind of stuff that players necessarily want out there. And because I remember Michael Jordan chiding on the bus trips, going from the hotel to the arena and really lambasting Jerry Krause. But none of us and nobody talked about that. It didn't come out really until, the Last Dance video came out a year ago. So, I mean, that's the type of stuff that, I don't know, somebody betrayed a confidence, in my opinion, for that stuff to come out. If, in fact, it happened, I don't know if it did because I wasn't there.
Well, we look around the division, and let me bring you back to Chicago first and then kind of try and get some thoughts from you on the Vikings and the Lions. But looking at the Bears from where you sit, it's funny. There are some, I'm already seeing now power rankings again with them 25th, 27th. There's other people that are more realistic. This is a team that is 29-21 over the last 3 years, been to the playoffs, 2 of them. The question in Chicago is that there were, until the Fields pick, a number of people who felt that Nagy and Pace absolutely had to get to the playoffs and win a playoff game to keep their jobs. Now that conversation is quieted, but the issue to me is there any chance with the team they have? Because the plan, we mentioned the similarities with Aaron Rodgers. Not only did Rodgers slip down tremendously for the Packers to go get him, he also waited 3 years to play. Yeah. The Bears have not come out and said it, but they don't want Justin Fields to be the opening day starter. Matt Nagy oversaw the Patrick Mahomes indoctrination in 2017, where he sat the whole year in Kansas City. And so if it's Andy Dalton at quarterback, can you see this being a team that can scare anybody?
Hub, I think Andy Dalton will provide better quarterbacking than the Bears have had over the last 3 years or so, or at least the last 2 years. Let's put it that way. I think he's still capable of doing that. I think he was decent in Dallas last year, and you've got a professional quarterback. You know what he is. You know what his ceiling is. You know what he does, how he works, that kind of thing. I think he can provide a level of competence. And they have enough on that offense around him, and they're trying to improve that offensive line, I know, but they have enough skilled people around him that they could be pretty decent on offense. They've lost a few chinks. There have been a few chinks in the armor on defense. They've lost a couple of people there, especially in the secondary. But nonetheless, this is still a team capable with just a competent quarterbacking hub of winning some games. Hey, they made the playoffs a year ago. Not all bad. And so, I think this is a team. Somebody asked me today, I was speaking at a luncheon today, and they asked, who do you think can improve the most in this division? And I thought the Bears could, if some of their young people come through on defense, if the quarterbacking is at least competent, this Bears team has a chance to be better, more improved than, let's say, the Lions, who are putting in the foundation, and the Vikings, who are still transitioning their defense.
We got I'm going to pull up this isn't a question, but it's a comment here from Tom Johns. Wayne, I just want to say that you're the best play-by-play man in football, and while Jeff Joniak is great, I do miss you. So there's some love coming from Chicago, Wayne.
Always appreciated.
Yeah, guys, it took about 5-6 years, but once all the transitioning was done, I started to hear from some folks who did miss our old broadcast. So it's always good to know that it's out there. And thank you, Tom. You're absolutely right. You're talking, I think I've said this repeatedly. I don't know. I'm biased. He's my best friend in the broadcast business, but I believe the best radio play-by-play guy in the NFL or in football. Wayne, before I want to talk about the Packers, I'm sorry, the Vikings and the Lions too, but just a thought on that, because I always make the distinction that it's a whole different world doing NFL play-by-play or color on radio as it is on TV. And you've done both. What are the differences as you see it?
Hub, it's amazing. And I did this for like 20 years or more. I would do a telecast on a Saturday afternoon in the Big Ten for ESPN regional or whatever, and then go and do a radio game. Maybe it was the Bears and later the Packers on radio. And it's funny because about midway through the first drive of the game, I'd have to stop myself and pinch myself and say, wait a minute now, they can't see that. You've got to tell them what happened on a certain, nuance of a play and that type of thing. So I always enjoyed the challenge of television to radio. Television, you're merely trying to, you're a traffic cop, number one. But the key on television, the key player in the broadcast is the analyst. He's the guy, the play-by-play guy. And this has changed a little bit because, we're seeing this personality-driven stuff on television now, especially with some of the younger broadcast teams, where the play-by-play guys gets into it personality-wise and back and forth with the analyst. But television is really about the analyst. Play-by-play is about framing the picture, trying to say something salient about what just happened on that big play. Maybe something that you hope, if it's a big enough play, you say something that's memorable, but something that not describes the play, but maybe puts an exclamation point to the play. So you're a traffic cop because you're getting from one thing to the other. You're going from the play to the analyst, to the highlight, to the commercials, back and forth. I found television play-by-play to be exhausting mentally compared to radio. And radio is exactly the opposite. Whereas you spend all your time on the framework of describing the play on television, you're just providing a frame. On radio, you're painting the picture, and it's a lot easier to paint the picture rather than get the right frame for the picture. So I found that to be the biggest challenge. And in radio, there aren't as many people involved. You don't have a producer telling you, okay, Wayne, we've got to get to this break. Or, okay, I've got this coming up. Or here's the shot of the coach on the sidelines. What about your story on this guy? And that type of thing. All things, you've got a much bigger group involved. So you have to be in concert with the picture people are seeing on the television screen. You're a slave to that. You are certainly a slave to the truck in that they have features. They are determined to get in, whether they belong or not. Believe me, the producer wants to get those things done. And you have the analyst who really is carrying the mail here because he's telling people what they saw, why it happened, and the nuances of why it happened, and showing them the replay. Whereas in radio, I'm just painting the picture. It's really easy. I've got a certain number of things to describe before the snap, after the snap, that type of thing. And then the analyst has the tough job. He's got basically 30 seconds to say something salient about the play people I just described.
Wayne, I think a lot of football fans were just a little bit in awe a couple of years ago when Tony Romo jumped into the booth and was doing what he was doing right off the bat. Was, as a broadcaster yourself, what were your thoughts on what he was able to do coming right from the game?
Well, I'll be more impressed if he's doing it 3 years from now, because
Okay.
he's gotten out of the game. And it's real easy when you're in the game to know what's coming up next. I mean, obviously he studied, as he was a quarterback and a very good one, and a real student to the game. It's why he is such a good analyst. But calling those plays, I remember, I think it was the New England-Kansas City game, and he basically called the game off the play sheet. He made it sounded like he had it in front of him. But that, I think, is easier to do when you're fresh from the game and you know where offenses are going and teams are going and how they're going to do things, what they're going to call in certain circumstances. And I think that was great. The thing about Tony that separates him, I think, he's real enthusiastic about it. When you listen to him, you feel good about the game. You feel like, yeah, I'm excited to be here because he's excited to be here. He's having a good time. And I think that's a big part of it. I really do. And I think the matchup with Jim Nantz, who's very understated. Jim Nantz is like that sofa in the family room, real comfortable, really understated. Almost anybody can sit on that sofa and fall asleep. And, I'm not saying that Nantz is boring at all. I'm saying he's perfect. He's great for what you need in a situation like that. You have Jim Nantz, very comfortable on one hand. Then you have this 5-year-old on the other hand, jumping up and down on the couch and having a great time. And I think they make a wonderful team. Nantz is clearly one of the foremost broadcasters of our time. And Tony Romo, I think, fits in pretty well.
Wait, I'm curious, and after this question, I promise we'll get back to a little more NFC North football before we have to run. But, we've talked a lot through the years about who we listened to and watched growing up and got us to wherever we ended up. But today, I haven't asked you this question in a long time. Who are the play-by-play and color guys that you kind of admire or even try and emulate the most?
Well, I was, I grew up in Western Massachusetts near the New York border, and I was always a Yankees fan. And but I'll tell you the announcer that caught my imagination, and this was back in the early 70s when the New York Knicks were winning 2 NBA titles in a span of about 4 years. And I was playing high school basketball. And it was at that point in time, I was listening on the radio to Marv Albert out of New York. And that really, his voice, his inflection, all the things he was doing. And he was also doing the Giants at the time in football and the Rangers in hockey. But Marv Albert captured my imagination. And he was a guy that I really wanted to model myself after. And especially with the number of different sports he did. So he was number one. And, for baseball, I really loved Phil Rizzuto. Not a good technical baseball announcer, but just the kind of guy that a baseball announcer you loved listening to because his voice he had so much inflection to his voice, that type of thing. So those are the guys who had a big influence. And then obviously Dick Enberg, Pat Summerall to a lesser degree, but those are the guys that really, Dick Enberg especially, boy, if anybody's ever done television better, I don't know who it is.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I didn't know you were going to go with Marv Albert. You remember Brad Saul from Public Interest Affiliates, and he actually launched the Pro Football Weekly syndicated radio show that Wayne and I did together for, I think it was 26 or 27 years. And for a long time, it was the largest non-game sports syndication in the country. This goes back to the end of the 80s and 90s. We were in the studio early in the 90s. Brad had asked me to come in and do something else. It was some special show he was doing, and Marv was anchoring it. And I'm sitting next to him in the studio, and I just kept pinching myself every 20 minutes. I'm broadcasting with Marv Albert. What's going on here? Because by then he was already legendary.
Oh, yeah.
And just a really good human being too. And actually, I believe it was just a couple of weeks ago announced that he's hanging him up. So interesting.
80 years old.
Yeah, no, he definitely one of the all-time greats.
Wow. So maybe getting back to the NFC North hub, Wayne, when you look at, we spent a lot of time talking about Aaron Rodgers and this whole situation, but let's just for a minute say that Aaron Rodgers is back. Can anybody challenge the Packers in this division if he does come back this season?
Guys, I think the Packers last year kind of 2 years ago when they made it to the championship game, went 13-3, I thought they were very fortuitous. this past season, I thought they were just good. And I still think they're good. I think they're well built. There's no place Aaron Rodgers can go and have a better shot to win the Super Bowl. No place that's available, let me put it that way, and go and win a Super Bowl than with the Packers. I think the draft this year, and with the expected improvement of the second and third year players on the roster, I think this might be the Packers' best team in quite some time. I think they have people around him. Obviously they led the league in scoring a year ago. Davante Adams might be arguably the best receiver in the league. Aaron Jones, a top 5 running back playmaker. Robert Tonyan had 11 touchdown catches. The offensive line last year, they lose the center, Corey Linsley. It's a big loss. But if they're able to shore that up, there's still one of the best offensive lines of football. Aaron Rodgers has plenty of tools around him, and that's not going to change. Amari Rodgers, the kid they drafted in the 3rd round out of Clemson, I have big hopes for him. I think he's going to have a big role in this offense. MVS got better as the season went on last year. Alan Lazard, if he's healthy, is going to be a very good 2 or 3 receiver in this offense. They have people. Defensively, they were better last year and down the stretch. If they can improve a little bit more this year, they'll be good enough. Secondary looks very strong. Inside linebacker, 2 question marks there. But the defensive line, Kenny Clark, has to be healthy, has to play for September, October, November, the way he's played the last couple of years in December. They need a full season from Kenny Clark from a performance standpoint. If they get that, this is the best team in the division in terms of a 53-man roster. How it goes with injuries and everything else, we don't know. We're just talking about paper here. We're talking about chalk.
You know what really intrigued me, Wayne, is the Packers are not famous for paying their own free agents. Obviously, they paid David Bakhtiari. You pay Aaron Rodgers, whatever you got to pay him. Davante Adams is ready for another contract now, which he has already started to drop some hints about. I think Kenny Clark got paid, but for the most part, a lot of guys end up leaving, rather than getting the big dollar deals. And yet they paid Aaron Jones at a position where almost nobody gets paid these days. And I think the reason, correct me if I'm wrong, is when people criticize Gutekunst and the organization for not getting Rodgers more weapons, they're just focused on a number 2 receiver. But in many regards, I think they would tell you that the Jones is the number 1 or number 2 target, and who has a better duo than Adams and Jones.
Yeah, Hub, you're exactly right. Bill Tobin, our old general manager in Chicago years ago, spoke about the salary cap and in what was coming up. And he said, the trick is going to be you keep your playmakers. Okay. Above all else, you keep playmakers. It would have been cheaper for the Packers to sign Jamal Williams, their 4th round pick in that draft, instead of Aaron Jones, their 5th round pick in that draft. But Aaron Jones is a playmaker. He scores touchdowns. He makes points. Jamal Williams is a very good, very solid back. Davante Adams, outstanding receiver. The Packers will pay him. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Where they haven't paid Hub, and this is going back years ago. You mentioned to me one time, said, the Packers' interior offensive line, this is going back almost a decade ago. You said, they're not very good on the interior of the offensive line. And when you go back to the Ron Wolf philosophy of building a roster, and it's still in place today in Green Bay, they don't pay huge bucks for interior offensive linemen. If they paid huge bucks for interior offensive linemen, don't you think Corey Linsley would be in Green Bay and not in Los Angeles with the Chargers? Yes. They haven't in the past spent a lot of money or even draft capital at inside linebacker. The last inside linebacker they drafted in the 1st round was A.J. Hawk. That was well over a decade ago. So, every team has this. They're going to pay for certain positions. In other positions, they're not going to quite pay. They're not maybe going to give that 3rd contract to the guy or even a 2nd contract if the guy's just good. He's got to be great to get that 2nd contract at certain positions. And so that's what I think we're seeing with the Packers. But they have stepped up. The reason the Packers are in a salary cap situation, especially going into next year, isn't so much the free agents they brought in 3 years ago. It is the players they have drafted and developed and signed, starting with Rodgers, Kenny Clark, David Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, Eventually, it will be Devontae Adams, and eventually it will be Jair Alexander. All of those guys are getting paid top of the market dollars. And when you have that happening, you've got some salary cap issues. There are two ways you get into salary cap hell, either through free agency or you've done such a good job of developing your own, you eventually have to pay them.
Wayne, I want to. We've only got a couple minutes left here, and I do want to at least get your take on the rest of the division. I don't think there's much to say about the Lions. They could have the best offensive line in football this year or in the next couple of years if Sewell is the player we think he is. You move Taylor Decker over outside. You got Frank Ragnow in the middle now, and I think DeAndre Swift's going to be a pretty good running back. But the fall off from Stafford to Goff, and then wiping out the wide receiver core and a defense that needs so much work. I like what Brad Holmes has done as a rookie GM, and I think their rebuild is off to a good start, but I'm hard-pressed to see them as much of a factor with the other three in the division.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Hub. They're putting in the foundation, though. And Jared Goff gets paid like a franchise quarterback, but that's all. He's not a franchise quarterback. Studying him, getting ready for the playoff game last year, it was abundantly clear that he is not a franchise quarterback, and obviously the Rams made that decision. But you're right. The thing about the Detroit front office, though, they put some smart people around that rookie general manager. And one of them is a friend of mine, John Dorsey, who I think is outstanding, one of the outstanding personnel people, and was on Ron Wolf's staff and then, Ted Thompson's staff. And they had Dorsey, they had Reggie McKenzie, who became the general manager of the Raiders. John Schneider is the general manager up in Seattle. They had a tremendous staff in Green Bay that built the Super Bowl 45 championship team. Dorsey is in Detroit. And let me tell you something. If they need a quarterback in a year or two in the draft, he's the guy who's going to pick them because he picked Mahomes in Kansas City. He picked Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, and he'll pick a quarterback in Detroit. I honestly think that's why he's on the staff, because when they get to a quarterback, if they draft one, he's going to make that decision, I would think. But I think they're laying the foundation. You're exactly right.
Wayne, where do you think the Vikings fit into this jigsaw puzzle? They've got Kirk Cousins under contract for a couple more years. They throw Christian Darrisaw into the mix. Where do you see them at this point? Yeah,
I think they're very good. It's funny because they've kind of flipped the MO of the head coach. Defense, and now they're more of an offensive team than they are a defensive team. Still transitioning on defense. Admitted the Hughes kid, a first-round draft choice a few years back, isn't working out, so they got him out of there. They had a lot of young people they're playing in that secondary. It'll be interesting to see if they can generate the pass rush. Danielle Hunter, big question mark in this division on that Minnesota line. So I still think they're going to be trouble offensively, guys, but defensively, I think they have big problems.
Wayne, you have already been over the top generous with your time. I do have to ask you one more question before we let you go, though. I'm going to bring it back home, being we're based here in Chicago. Part of the name of the podcast is Bears Insider. And again, folks, for whatever coverage you need of the NFC North, the Bears, the Packers, go to shawlocal.com. Sean and I have pieces there pretty much every day, even during the off season. But the Bears, I think, got caught a little off guard by the retirement of Chuck Pagano. I'm not terribly surprised. I think that of all the people who made heroic efforts during a pandemic or public health crisis year, what Pagano went through was particularly unique, knowing his battle with cancer and that his immune system had been compromised. And so it wasn't a shock, but I don't think that they necessarily planned for it either. And so they promote from within a young man named Sean Desai, only 8 years coaching experience, only 2 as even a position coach, really a quality control guy. And they make him the defensive coordinator in large part because he is a Vic Fangio disciple. Vic Fangio is the guy who mentored and developed him as a coach. And that's what they want to get back to is 2018. But it left a lot of people, concerned about the lack of experience. And he's only 37, 38 years old. So they hire Mike Pettin. And I don't think that they did it just because they want to learn more about the Packers. We see these hirings all the time, and we assume, you're trying to learn more. No. I really personally felt that Mike Pettin got kind of a bad deal in Green Bay just in terms of a lot of the criticism that he took. I don't know that he always had the talent to compete with the other top defenses in the league, but he certainly is a veteran presence. He was with Fangio in Baltimore for a few years, and I think pairing him with Desai makes this an interesting situation. But I'm curious about your experience with Mike having been up there, for quite a while now in Green Bay.
All the respect in the world for Mike Pettine. At some point, you know how coaching is. You're going to go your separate ways, and that's what happened with the Packers and Mike. But no, tremendous defense coordinator. And yes, Hub, this was a great pickup. And on the outside, I understand where fans are thinking that it was just so Pettine's going to tell them all the stories of Green Bay. No, I think Pettine is there to help this Chicago defense and to help this young coordinator. And you know what, Hub? I think that this was a great hire. I think this is excellent for the Bears in that regard. He will be a sounding board, and he will provide them with a great resource. And not just on the Packers, but on defense in general and what they're implementing in their defense. They got their work cut out for them. As I mentioned, the secondary lost Kyle Fuller. That's a big loss. They're not quite as stout on the defensive line, but they still have some great people on defense. Love their linebackers. And, Pettine and this young defense coordinator you mentioned, I think they could do some good things in Chicago. And if they do, and if Andy Dalton is competent, then the Bears are going to challenge in this division.
All right, Sean, I have already kept Wayne about 15 minutes longer than I promised, which he knows I do have a kind of a predisposition for. I really do apologize for that, but we couldn't. I don't know where the time went. Wayne, it is always so great getting to catch up. And Sean, great job as always. We do want to thank our sponsors, Heinz Lumber, 11 locations around Chicago. If you have a contracting job, if you're doing an addition, if you're building a home, whatever it may be, for all of your lumber and building supply needs, make sure you get to the closest Heinz Lumber location near you. For Wayne Larrivee and Sean Hammond, thank you so much for being with us today for our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. Don't forget, go to ShawLocal.com, go to your iTunes store, go to your app store, download a subscription so it comes to you automatically. Wayne, thank you so much, and we will probably reach out to you again once we get in season. I hope you won't mind. And in the meantime, best to Julie and the kids, and I hope everything continues to go great up there for you guys.
Same here, guys. Look forward to our next get-together. Enjoyed it a lot.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.